Well, it's worth noting the French submarines have been beset by delays and massive cost blowouts. It was going to cost the Australian taxpayer around $90 billion. And it's worth going back to the politics of this. The deal was done back when Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister. Nick Xenophon held the balance of power in the Senate. Senator Xenophon, who was pivotal in pressuring the coalition to scrap a deal with Japan and enter the French contract to build 12 submarines in Australia because he wanted to see a local component. Well, Nick Xenophon joins us live now from South Australia. Good to see you. What do you think about this announcement today?
Well, the devil's in the detail. Look, the French submarine deal has been an absolute dud. It has cost a lot more than it was meant to. We have a situation now where the French weren't performing in their part of the deal. It's going to cost millions to get out of it. But the devil is in the detail here. We simply do not know what this deal will mean. We don't have the capacity to build a nuclear sub right now. Will we just be an assembly plant? Will there be more jobs or less jobs involved in this? So the devil is in the detail. And there's some big strategic issues. We don't have the infrastructure for a nuclear submarine industry here. And I think that this is going to play out over a number of months as to what this actually means for Australian jobs, but also the broader geopolitical strategic issues. It means that this is about the US alliance, and I understand that, but we need to do what is in Australia's interests first and foremost. This is about having submarines, nuclear submarines, that will be deployed many thousands of kilometres from Australia, and it's about the alliance and about China. And these are the big issues that we need to also consider.
Well, let's go back a step because for years you've been warning about cost blowouts with the French subs, but this deal was essentially done because you kept the political heat and focus on there being a local manufacturing capability. So do you take some responsibility on having, that focus on local manufacturing? Therefore, the government probably didn't make the best choice at the time.
Well, you can't lay that on me. If the Abbott and then the Turnbull and then the Morrison governments ended up doing a dud deal, I wasn't in the room negotiating with them. I wouldn't have negotiated the deal that they did.
What would you have done back then? What did you want done back then?
What I would have done is to drive a harder deal, but I'm not. That was above my pay grade. My job was to make sure the submarines were made in South Australia. Then Defence Minister Christopher Pyne and Defence Material Minister previously, there was a lack of clarity. There was a lack of rigour in the process, in my view, to ensure a minimum Australian content deal. There were so many holes in that deal. So I'll take full responsibility for pushing for Australian jobs, Australian content, but I'm not going to cop it in terms of the execution of that being stuffed up by governments.
But in the pursuit of that Australian content, was the wrong strategic defence decision made?
No. To have subs built here locally, to have them built with a proven design, these are all important things. But this was going to be a new design based on the French submarine design. I think the problem we had there was that the lack of attention to detail, in my view, the fact that we didn't drive a harder bargain, and we should have learned from other countries that have difficulties with the French in terms of submarine programs, particularly in India. So, again, the devil's going to be in the detail with this deal. A lot of money has been wasted, good taxpayers' money that could have been spent on other things, such as aged care, such as health. So we need to have a degree of rigour here that there wasn't with the earlier deal that was done.
Indeed. And look, it seems like there's been a complete change here. Did you push for nuclear subs at the time?
No, I didn't, for the simple reason that we don't have that capability. So we need to know how much this is going to cost in terms of being nuclear sub ready.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Xenophon, but it's been a while since we've been able to do one of these interviews. I mean, you say you didn't push for nuclear at the time because we didn't have that capability, but isn't nuclear the key to that local jobs push in South Australia? Isn't that such an important, critical element here?
Well, it is a critical element, but we don't know the details. To have you need to have an infrastructure for a nuclear industry. There are risk factors to be taken into account. You need to manage the risk. There are increased risks if you're dealing with nuclear. I'm not ideologically or implacably opposed to nuclear as such. I'm just concerned about the infrastructure that needs to be in place. What will this mean in terms of those countries in the Pacific that won't host a nuclear submarine?
You're talking about New Zealand,
berthing there. Well, New Zealand, and if there are other countries, but there's a whole range of issues that we need to consider. The fact is, we decided on conventional power submarines a number of years ago on the basis that they don't have the same range or endurance as a nuclear submarine, but they are actually quieter. So in terms of stealth capability, we may lose something there, which may not be a good thing in terms of the protection of Australia.
Yeah, indeed. We are losing that stealth capability with a nuclear submarine. Can I talk about the infrastructure to support a nuclear sub as well? Do you think, all these years on, South Australia and maybe Australia more broadly is more willing to embrace nuclear?
Again, we need to know the details. What will it mean? Will we be more than just an assembly plant? What will it mean in terms of the infrastructure? Will it mean that the servicing of the nuclear submarines will have to be done elsewhere in Honolulu, for instance, because as I understand it, it will be based on a US design. So they're the sorts of things that we need to ask to get our heads around. And again, what will the cost be and what will it mean in terms of Australia's sovereign capability to service these nuclear subs? It may be that we won't have that infrastructure up and running for a number of years. So we may see for a number of years these submarines being serviced in Honolulu, for instance, which is obviously not good for Australian jobs.
But what would be the problem with that in the short term? I mean, all these things take time.
Oh, sure, but it depends what you mean by short term. If short term is going to mean 10, 15 years, they say a week is a long time in politics, but if 10 to 15 years of submarines being serviced overseas, we just don't know.
And Nick Xenophon, the world has changed, wouldn't you agree, since this deal was done? Is it right that there now be more of a focus, that the balance is more weighed against what our best strategic weapons and facilities are? The Australian jobs component is very important, but it is largely outweighed by what we need in a military sense, isn't it?
Of course, and we need to have an honest debate about what this means in geopolitical terms and strategic terms. I heard in the media this morning, Hugh White, who's one of the founding directors of ASPI, who's a highly regarded, in my view, a very independent defence analyst, a strategic analyst. This means that we will be more in lockstep with the US. We have obviously a very close alliance with the US, but our ability to say no to anything that the US does, I think, will be further limited. And that some people may say it's not a bad thing, but we need to have that honest debate as a nation in terms of our sovereignty and our independence when it comes to something like this. The fact is, advantages with nuclear, of course, but it will mean a big geopolitical shift in terms of what we are doing as a nation, and we need to take that into account. But of course, I'm also interested from a parochial sense what this means for Australian manufacturing sovereignty, Australian jobs, in particular here in South Australia.